Hey, good morning. 30-minute countdown. I'm going to talk quick. I'm from the East Coast, so I'm going to try to do this at Jersey auctioneer speeds. I grew up, basically, my career started in the Pentagon as a computer security officer. I waited in line outside the office of an 06 at the 7th Communications Group, and I was first in line, and I walked in, and the colonel gave me 6 options, actually, of what I could do for the next several years. And at that time, I remember thinking I took the least bad of 6 bad choices, and I chose computer security. And I only chose it because there's only 1 slot left in computer security. So I was like, I'll do that one, and if I don't like it, well, they have plenty of need for computer scientists and all these other things. About 5 to 6 months after I took that job, we started putting visibility into our networks at the Pentagon, and it was in May of 1993, is the first I can recollect, us having the Automated Security Incident Measurement Tool, or ASIM boxes, being put in at the Pentagon, where all we did is we watched FTP command channel, so that means we could see if people were FTPing, but we didn't see the data that they were transferring. Fascinating. Remote shell, telnet, and there's a 4th one I'm forgetting, remote login, I think. And anyway, started then in 1993. Between now and then, or then and now, I've spent my career primarily just responding to security breaches, either personally or with an army of folks behind me doing it. And what I want to do today is talk to you about our conclusions based on the last 500 or so breaches that we've responded to. When we respond to these breaches, we have intelligence coming to us from a lot of different areas. And one is we have over 6,000 customers that use our sensors. We update those sensors thousands of times every hour based on what we're learning on the front lines. But we get good intel from those sensors as to who's up to what in cyberspace. We also have about 230 threat analysts in 19 different countries that speak 32 languages. And you might think, well, why do we need these threat analysts? But as we respond to breaches, it's pretty cool to have them out there where we can find something on site at a victim company that's been compromised, and we can farm it out to 250 people saying, who do we think did this? Why do we think they did that? Where are they in the world? Or quite frankly, just for the translation skills or to try to figure out the native language of some of these actors. We have over 300 incident responders. As I stand here right now, we're responding to approximately 24 breaches. All of them are at companies you heard of. All of them have the most recent safeguards you can buy. I liken it to we're the last line of defense. When all the technology fails you, we're the folks that get the phone call to respond to the breaches. So we'll talk about these. I actually went through the last 12 months. We've responded to or done about 665 investigations. And every time we do these investigations, we just answer 2 questions. What happened? What to do about it? That simple. The what happened, all the computer forensics to figure out what we need to do. And the what to do about it is remediation plans that are really tailored based on the security maturity of the customer that we're helping. And then the Accentures of the world, the Ernst & Youngs, the PricewaterhouseCoopers folks come in behind us, or the HPs, and they do these long, protracted remedial drills. But we get to learn a lot on the front lines. We've responded in 17 different countries, but that is a weird and misleading statistic. I can tell you this, we try to be in all the hot zones. We have folks in South Korea because they blame everything on North Korea. We have folks in Israel because it matters. I think that right now we see our incident response work, or responding to breaches, it's on the rise in the Middle East more than anywhere else. So it's becoming a hotbed of cyber activity. We're in Kiev right now. We're in a lot of different neat places where we get to see the front lines of cyber, because I think what Russian operatives do in the Ukraine is probably a good lesson for us if we want to get predictive as to what they're going to do here in cyberspace. And then, by the way, the United States, I think, is a hot zone. If you want to hack a company and extort a company and get real money without risks or repercussions, we're your best target. So, but the 17 countries, that just means that's where the companies we're helping, that's where they've been headquartered. So let's get right to the conclusions. And I'll tell you my first conclusion is there's no risks or repercussions to hacking us. Well, we have a few others right now. I always track this, and I've been doing this since 1998. So how do people even know they have an incident? What triggers an incident? You can see we're doing far better than in 1998 through about 2010. This number was over 90% of all breaches were externally detected. Usually the FBI would knock on the door, and the FBI might have been a proxy for another government agency, but in the United States, The early warning system was the FBI basically saying, hey, listen, you've got a problem. We found some of your data on a site we're monitoring, and then they'd go away. But this is a pretty good statistic, and it's trending in the right place. And then I call this dwell time, and it's just directionally you can see this. This is only based on the breaches we respond to, so there's a kind of bias to it. Nobody calls us to respond to a breach when they're 5 minutes behind the breach. And nobody calls us on the drive-by shootings because most companies can prevent those or minimize the impact and damage of them because there's no human on a keyboard 5 seconds behind a drive-by shooting. They're usually, sometimes there's no human interaction to those breaches. The ones we respond to traditionally are nation-state sponsored, condoned, or quite frankly, it's an operation by another nation against the private sector, sometimes government. And I think we're getting a lot better. Being 416 days from the moment you've been breached to the moment you know it isn't so terrific. You know, and by the way, your best defense there, the only time you ever impacted the attacker is when you bought new equipment, you didn't know you were breached, but as you did your normal IT acquisition, you started impacting their ability to access what they wanted. Down to 99 days. That's still not good in reality. And the reason I say that is that for the most part, when we do red team operations and companies hire us to say, can you make this threat become a reality, we usually can do it in under 3 days. So if somebody's targeting your organization, and by the way, for everybody in this room, I think you are targeted. I think it's with real humans, and if they do get in, you don't have 99 days. You've got a lot less. I think if you make cupcakes for a living and somebody hacked you, you've got 99 days. And the reason why is you're not the end site that was compromised. You're just a mitigating site in the middle of it all. You're just a site in the middle. So we got to do better here. We'll keep tracking it, and that's based on about 600 cases. So first conclusion, and this has not changed my whole career in reality. Very rarely, when I was in the Air Force, very rarely did we take electrons and evidence and go find humans. We did. But what happened is we kind of cleansed the United States from hackers. And they may say they're out there, but I do believe this. If you're in the United States and you hack, you get caught. If you're in most modern Western nations and you hack, you get caught, if we choose to do so. Because in most modern nations where we have international engagement and cooperation, we have conditional anonymity, not real anonymity, and you can pierce anonymity when you choose to do so. So the breaches we're responding to, in my opinion, are from Iran, North Korea, Russia, China. Those four, over 90% of them. And they usually pass through US universities and other infrastructure of third parties that don't know they've been breached. Second conclusion, and this will probably not surprise anybody, over 90% of the breaches we respond to, victim zero, was spearphished. So we're all as secure as our weakest link, which is a human, and the human that clicks on a link. The majority of the breaches we respond to, there is no exploit of software. And by the way, I said the word majority still. It isn't about a patch. It's about getting a human to not execute something. So it's a big problem. If you can get in communication, and I think this all goes back to we all have infrastructure where we do our business on it, and at the same time frame, it allows faceless people to communicate with our employees. And while you control windmills on the same infrastructure that you do faceless, anonymous communications, you can have problems. Spear phishing is 91% of the breaches we responded to. In other portions of the world, that percentage actually goes down. Meaning, in the United States, our health and welfare system for internet-facing systems is actually better right now than in Asia, where we do see drive-by shootings by more advanced groups. They can find a vulnerable system, internet-facing, with a publicly available exploit, and they'll take advantage of that. So it's more rare in the US. Bottom line, 90% of the breaches, spear phishing, one employee gets popped, and then one of the big things in common with all the breaches where there's been significant impact is there's one passphrase that works everywhere. So if I can spear phish one employee's machine at, pick a company, somewhere on that machine is probably the cache credentials of domain admin or local admin, and most of us all have a provisioning of local admins the same on every single machine. So if I compromise one machine and get local admin and I don't do other safeguards, the bad guys or the intruders can just propagate wildly on your network. So that's a big problem called lateral movement. Something that took me 18 years of responding to breaches, doing over 10,000 hours of forensics, and I never quite got it, was that the intrusions that I was responding to and our people are responding to were tied to geopolitical conditions on the planet. And believe it or not, that's pretty sad. I should have figured this out sooner. It hit me in August of 2013 when we responded to the Syrian Electronic Army we were responding to them 7 times in 1 week. And at the same time that we're responding to this anonymous group called the Syrian Electronic Army, I can't tell you, whoever they are, they're pro-Assad, anti-rebel, or anti-freedom fighter, depending on how you look at the conflict in Syria. But at the time, we were threatening armed conflict in Syria based on the use of chemical weapons there. So you have the threat of us maybe sending some armed troops to Syria because the red line had been crossed and the use of chemical weapons occurred. And we're responding to 7 breaches into all the Western media. All the bigs got compromised by the Syrian Electronic Army. The websites were altered. The email for the reporters that were reporting on conditions of Syrian refugees was compromised. It was pretty fascinating. So that's when it hit me, wait, these intrusions are tied to this incident. So what are we seeing right now? I'm going to go through 4 real quickly because, again, it's Russia, China, Iran, North Korea is what we're seeing in cyberspace usually. First, we'll go with China. I've spent my whole career responding to these folks for the first time. And by the way, I want to caveat, I'm not anti-China, not anti-Russia, I'm not anti-Iran. I don't know about North Korea. I haven't formed an opinion yet. But they're interesting to respond to and hard to predict. And let's start with China. My whole career I've been responding to them. The first time I ever responded to them, it was kind of the Wild West of the internet. It was 1996, and I know you can go back further, but I was in the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, and I had the privilege of flying around and responding to breaches where primarily I'd ask for consent. Hey, do you mind if I monitor your network and all traffic to and from a machine? I'd get that consent from a university, and then I'd actually sometimes ask that university for the hardware to do it. Hey, can I also borrow a Spark 20 machine and do the monitoring? But we were always specific. We always had JAGs looking into it, and we always had to minimize what we collected to and from specific machines. And the first time I ever saw China en masse was I responded to 1 machine at a US university, and in the first day I was worried, like, I hope we get something, because I did have to brief, at that time anyway, on a daily basis, the JAG, on what are we getting from our consensual monitoring, and we had to brief it every day, and if we got nothing for about 10 days, I'm pretty sure they would have had us yanked it. And day 1, the first thing I saw, and I don't remember the exact number, but it ended in a 7, is either 27 or 37 military bases were compromised. And I learned in that day that the Chinese were hacking us. We knew that anyway, but they had already done division of labor. And here's how I knew that. Whoever I was monitoring came into a US university. They were using an account from a former Chinese foreign national that attended that university but left, and the account was never shut off. And all they did is logged into Air Force Base number 1, valid user ID and passphrase. And from there, just hit the second one, valid user ID and passphrase. And all the user IDs and passphrases were different. So they had division of labor, somebody that just tested, do the accounts work? And then they had another team that would go in and steal stuff based on the access. And I think that makes sense. But I think it was 37 military installations from all 4 branches were compromised day 1. And that was 1996, August. I didn't sleep that night. But China's changed since then, and they've changed dramatically. I don't know what's going to happen on any given day. Maybe we have sanctions and they change behaviors. But we kind of locked into China from 2004 to about 2015. We were seeing them compromise, and we used to graph it every month. Over 80 companies in the United States were compromised by groups that we felt were military units or contractors in China hacking the US private sector. And they were hacking Germany, and they were hacking India, they were hacking Japan, but we had locked into them in the United States. And then you may have seen that there's a treaty and there's kind of rules of engagement, and a little bit of an agreement with us in China. And I've observed anyway, on a monthly basis, they went from hacking about 80-something US companies a month down to under 5, based on the infrastructure we observe and what we see, based on our responses to them. In the United States, they've dialed it way back, and their targeting seems to have been reduced. Hard to tell, by the way, what's fair game for them to target in the private sector, but it has been reduced. Russia, different story. And I've spent even longer portions of my career responding to breaches we'd attribute to the Russian government. And they're fascinating because when I first responded to them when I was in the military, they evaporated every time we caught them. It was kind of interesting. It was almost like a gentleman's agreement. You can tell when you've been noticed in cyberspace if you're any good. You know, hosts kind of appear and disappear. You might see the addition of software. You might see the network countermeasures start to be implemented, blocking certain IPs or different traffic. And every time we caught what we thought was Russia on our networks, they just kind of seized their activities, and we couldn't observe them. In my career, they followed those rules of engagement for like 2 decades. We caught them, they would just go away. And maybe 3 months later, they'd come back over the wall again, spearfish someone, get back in, or more likely, they just always had credentials that worked. 4 things changed in 2015 and 16, and I think in hindsight, we saw them starting to change in 14 in Eastern Europe, but we didn't really see it here in the US. First thing that changed is I got a call in August of 2015. We had a group of responders at a government agency, and Russia wasn't going away. And that surprised me. They absolutely knew we were watching them. Trust me, we were installing our software everywhere. And the software we use to respond to breaches is called Mandia Intelligent Response, or MIR. It was never lost on us that MIR is the Russian word for peace. And at this site, we're putting mir.exe on every Windows machine so we can deep dive and do forensics. I'm pretty sure the Russian team hacking that agency saw that. And they just kept coming. And it was another thing that was interesting on that, they let us observe, and it was almost mathematically perfect. It was the same malware that they were placing on every machine, but about 10% of all the machines compromised had something new. And it never deviated. It was like 1 out of 10. I almost pictured their level of exactitude where somebody was like, all right, it's the 10th machine, try something new on it. They were giving it to us. It was like a digital cocktail party. We were invited to it, and they changed. Second thing they changed is they stopped doing the counter-forensics they used to do. Don't know why. Maybe it's because they started acting on a scale that they couldn't do their forensics or their counter-forensics. And counter-forensics can be built in, but it's also very manual. And I'll give you an example. If you hack a machine, traditionally you'll create a working directory on the machine you have command level access. You'll put the tools you'll use in that directory, and if you're staging stuff to steal, you'll put it in that directory, and then when you leave the machine, you'll just delete the directory and its contents. That's good counter-forensics. It's manual, but you got to do it. I guess you could automate it, but that'd be boring. They stopped doing manual counter-forensics. Third thing is their targeting definitely broadened. We started responding to universities that were compromised by groups we call APT Group 28 and APT Group 29. And they were compromising professors at US universities and stealing their email. And I'd seen the Chinese always do that, but I always felt the Russians played sort of fair in espionage. They would steal our IP for weapon systems, and they usually were .mil against .mil, .gov against .gov. To see them hit a university, but not for research, and to see them stealing the emails of anti-Putin professors, to me was a change in the game for them. And then the fourth thing they did, but they didn't do it until 2016, is what people refer to as doxing. You know, they stole documents. I have no doubt they stole documents during our election year and started leaking them to who knows what. You know, there's overt, covert, and gray. The internet is a phenomenal platform for gray operations, and it's very difficult to get great attribution, especially as a private company. All I can tell you is we saw the intrusions and we saw the loss of data, and then suddenly we see that data, a very small portion of it, by the way, appear online. That surprised me. It happened in 2014 in European elections, but that was brought here in 2016. North Korea, hard to predict. We respond to them right now. We have a much harder time doing attribution from North Korea. The good news, I think their infrastructure that they use to attack is much smaller than China and Russia. And I probably left one thing out on Russia I got to share with you. The infrastructure the Russian government uses to attack US companies and other nations happens to be a shared infrastructure for the most part with Russian criminal. Very frustrating from an attribution standpoint. North Korea is just bizarre because we've seen them hack and we've seen telltale signs that maybe they're behind some of the SWIFT breaches, but their behavior behind a breach to make money is so dramatically different from their behavior behind like the Sony Pictures breach that's real hard for us to figure out sometimes whether it's really North Korea or not. Or, you know, I'm not sure there's any rogue hackers in North Korea. I really believe they only have about 7 or 8 IP addresses. fascinating to respond to them. Iran is one we got to keep an eye on, by the way. In 2008 was the first time we ever responded to a group from Iran. As a company, we didn't know it was Iran. We were responding to a breach, and some of our connections in the US government kind of gave us the tap saying, hey, we know you're there, and that's Iran that you're responding to. And I said, that's great, good to know. We were responding to them maybe 5 times a year in 2008, and they didn't look that good. They looked like they were right out of the classroom. And I'll give you a quick example. They hacked a state government here in the US, and when they went to steal everything, they roared up the whole C drive, meaning they stole the operating system. That's not that impressive. But they're a lot better now. In fact, they've had years of operational experience, so now we can't really tell. Technically, they're starting to use X-agent infrastructure. They push the tools they need when they need them. They have custom tools that are below the radar. They're showing signs of a real cyber capability. And then, just randomly, I'll add Vietnam. We exposed 13 different breaches where we attribute it to the government of Vietnam. And you can see the asymmetry in cyberspace where a nation like Vietnam says, let's get in the game. There is nothing simple about the breaches they're doing. They're showing good language skills, good spear phishing skills, good malware skills. They're surreptitious. And so even they're getting in on the playing field and impacting. So you can expect, as geopolitical conditions are tightening on at least Iran, North Korea, Russia, and potentially China, you're going to see additional breaches. Talked about the asymmetry and the no balance of power. I'll give you this one. I was thinking about this. So what do you do when a nation like Russia hacks you and they start doxing you? Can you go eye for eye? I don't think you can. And it's fascinating that we have an extra asymmetry in cyberspace that most other nations don't have. We have a free press. How could that make it asymmetrical? Well, here's how. If you hack the United States and steal documents and post them, our press will cover it. They'll read those documents. They'll publish those documents, and it spreads. And usually people lose jobs over those sort of things. If we hacked Putin's email and posted it, what do you think would happen to him? Nothing. It's totally asymmetrical. There'd be no risk of repercussions. I mean, if we posted his email, it would probably help him somehow. I don't think Trump has email, and he tweets everything. But at the end of the day, it's a fascinating thing. I thought about that as we were getting doxxed during the election. There is no eye for eye on this one. With a free press, we are additionally vulnerable, and we give great credibility to faceless, nameless, anonymous folks when they post things, which could be a dangerous thing. They're not all telling the truth all the time. So it's fascinating. So we have no balance of power in cyberspace because we're just playing goalie. Wayne Gretzky can put the puck in the net on any given day. If the best hackers go after most private sector organizations, I would say most, I'd go above that. Well over 95% of every private sector company can be compromised by the best hackers, and over time, probably 100%. So it's all depending on whether you're in their target zone or not. So we have an imbalance in the asymmetry of cyberspace. Somebody asked to the last speaker, does ISIS have this capability? It only takes one great person to have a great capability. That's the one thing about cyberspace, it scales. You have one exploit developer that's great, and you've got a great hacking squad. It's that simple. So you can get out there with a couple of ways to remain surreptitious and gain access with a 0-day. So asymmetry in cyber, by the way, is so bad, it's kind of like when you hear a physics guy lecturing about the size of the universe and how vast it is and nobody understands it. It is very bad how asymmetric it is. You see software products that say we're 99% effective in detecting malware. That 1% they don't detect is really bad on the internet. It's flat out bad. That just means there's about 1 million bad files a day that don't trigger the signature-based stuff that we have. So real quickly, the extortion is coming up, and I can tell you this, I try to keep my opinions out of things, but there's nothing good about anonymous currency. I mean, I can't figure out if there's anything good about it. And right now, with the rise of Bitcoin, we're seeing way more extortion. And it used to be if you had to make money on the internet as a bad guy, you'd hack, steal credit data, fraudulently buy stuff, and then you had to sell that stuff to get the cash. You'd try to monetize it. Or if you got the Holy Grail, you could make fake ATM cards and go straight for cash. I think those days are kind of over, and it's because, one, we got better with our card security. We just did over time. And two, you have an anonymous currency. Those same hackers that used to hack for credit data and then even go beyond that, I think if anyone's out there in an impoverished nation or a nation that's not ideologically aligned, the amount of damage you can do, hacking a company, stealing their IP, stealing whatever you want, and then monetizing it as well anonymously is a fantastic power to give faceless individuals. I'm less than 3 weeks removed from doing 2 phone calls with C-level execs that were being extorted for a certain amount of Bitcoin. And here's the frustrating thing. Whether you pay it or not, the stuff still gets leaked. It's ridiculous. And there used to be a day between 1998 and 2003 when we responded to extortions back in the good old days. There seemed to be honor amongst thieves. The extortions were about $5,000. If you paid it, the attacker didn't leak your information, and that was it. But nowadays, if you're getting extorted, it's going to be for Bitcoin, and you can make the assumption, most likely, plan for the worst, hope for the best, that the data that you're paying to not see online will be Google indexed within the next few weeks. So extortion's on the rise. If you can be hacked, you will be hacked. That's an unfortunate reality. And then some of these folks, if they can get general counsel's email, CEO's email, or private data of any capacity, you can expect the extortion email. Very frustrating thing. I can tell you ahead of time, when I get involved in those things, I can hear it in the voices of general counsel, external counsel, and the CEO. There is no magic bullet. I don't have a good answer. If you're being extorted and they have your information, we can't read the minds of the extortionists. And I'm not even convinced sometimes the hacker is the same person as who's extorting you. I can't tell sometimes. Sometimes there's such a removal. One time, we responded to a breach. The breach happened well over a year prior, and the extortions happened within the last 3 to 4 weeks. The extortions are well into the 7 figures now. I'm expecting 8 figures any day. If you get hacked and you know it, someone else does, that's simple. And so let me expound on that just a minute. So if you're in leadership and you've been hacked and you know it, immediately start the sprint, because it's very frustrating to disclose during the fog of war. And I can tell you all the first innings of every breach, there's a little bit of the fog of war. And you don't want to have rumor mill getting out in front of the realities of the breach you've got. We help more companies, it's probably well over 100 a year, where the public is finding out the company's breach at the same time the company is. Terrible situation to be in if you're a leader at that private sector organization or even a government organization. You don't have a lot of time to get your arms around this. And I have simple rules. By the way, if that ever happens to you, give me a call. In my bag, I keep the same rules that I've advised almost every company on public breaches. But there's no one way to handle them, but I'm amazed how much leadership has to deal with that issue. It is highly probable as a government agency, the day you're compromised, especially with the compromises that are happening now where there's a little more damage and it's kind of hard for you to handle things on your own time frame and on your own terms, I think it's going to go public real quickly. And you're going to want to get your arms around that incident, and you're going to want to figure out who needs to know what and when. And that's a tough thing to do. Influence campaigns are real. I could use your help on this one. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm still amazed, and I'm thinking it's already changing, but I'm still amazed how much influence anonymous, faceless people have when they just randomly post something. It can be massively false, and it is fake news, or it's totally a lie, and it still has great credibility. And these influence campaigns are getting more and more frequent, and I do think they're deployed by nation states, which is fascinating to me, against companies, and I don't know why they're doing it. I can't read the mind, but, and what I mean by the influence campaigns, hacking a company, leaking documents in a coordinated way with a certain amount of themes emphasized around it that aren't even relevant to the documents stolen. It's just weird. It's a way to garner some kind of coalition behind ideology. Right now, and I'll probably end on this slide because I was going kind of slow, and I know Brett Arsenault is going to be briefing from Microsoft, so I get to tee up, here's all the headaches you're going to have, and then he's going to come up here and tell you how you can fix them all. Attribution absolutely matters, and I think that's very important for this group. And it happens for many different reasons. There are no risks or repercussions. There is no proportional response unless you know who did these breaches. In our view of the world at FireEye, I think attribution is getting more complex, not easier. And we've got some groups that we've responded to for 10 straight years, and we've been codifying the trace evidence and the techniques they've used for 10 years. But there was a time at the end of 2010 where at Mandia, where I used to work, every breach we responded to went into like 10 buckets. It was amazing. We had 40 buckets of groups. But we respond to breach and go, oh, that's APT group 3, this is APT group 5, and we don't know how to name stuff. It was just integers. You know, we were boring. But it was only 40 groups, and now we have well over 1,000, and most of them are unknown to us. And it's because, on the good news, our defenses and countermeasures are changing fast enough that the TTPs have to change. But on the bad news, we can't see the patterns anymore like we used to. So very complicated. So I'll leave on that thought, because when I think about intelligence, I think the first wave of attribution does come from the intelligence community. It absolutely matters even directionally, and it makes a big difference. If my company's compromised and it's a drive-by shooting, we accept the risks there. But if we're compromised by a nation state and a cyber military attack, it's good to know the government stands behind us in that situation, and we can work together on it. With that, I thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.